Good afternoon. I'm Lee Cassidy, and I've got along with me Jesse Nine from SimSpace. And what we're going to talk to you today about is cyber ranges. So a lot of people don't know what a cyber range is, and what it is a way to create an immersive simulation of a cyber environment. So your own, customer environment. So everything you've got in there, all of your infrastructure networks, cybersecurity technologies as well, and to be able to then use that a part of either training or what we call a live fire event, which is an actual attack simulation to see how your SOC team, your blue team, your defenders cope with that. So we're going to go into more depth about it, a little bit of history, where they've come from and things. But the key thing, it's a simulation. And one of the key things about that is it's a safe space. So it means two things. If we want to reset and start again, it's really quick for us to do that. But also, because it's not your production environment, it's effectively a digital copy of it, it means that you're not going to bring your production systems to their knees through that activity of the attack. So it's going to make things a lot simpler in that respect. So that's what we're going to talk about. So Jesse, how are you?
Doing well. Thank you,
Yeah.
Lee.
So, we're talking about the cyber ranges. You've been involved with cyber ranges a little bit longer than myself, because you were working with them at a previous organisation as well as at SimSpace. So, what are your thoughts on where they came from and why they were developed in the first place? And then we'll talk about specifically SimSpace.
Here at SimSpace, we as a company have been around for 6 or 7 years. Before that, the founders worked together in the Cyber Flag exercises, which were put on by the U.S. Cyber Command, and they were kind of the first of their kind in cyberspace. But what they evolved out of were actual wargaming exercises with parts of the military. So, when you have people that eat, sleep, live MiG fighters so that they can be, the opposing force. That's kind of the what it's all based on.
Because I'm ex-RAF, and we used to do red flag, and that was in the Nevada desert, and you'd have your blue forces against your red forces. So the red forces were the attacking, theoretically Russian or Eastern Bloc countries at that time, and your blue forces were your good guys that were trying to defend against it, and also sometimes offensively attack as well, part of the actual scenario. So it all comes from that, real world wartime simulation effectively, but then taking that into the context of cybersecurity and that space.
And so the idea is that you're not just using the tools and the hardware of the opposing force, you're using the entire thinking behind it. And so
it's
apply
the same
that
process
to cyberspace, and you've got the same thing. Think like if depending upon how detailed you're going, you're thinking like the attacking force. So be that a nation state actor or an advanced persistent threat actor, any of them. That's the idea, is that you would have that going on in the red side. I mean, it could be as complex as that, or you could go very simplistic and use something like an automated attack, or some sort of breach attack simulation. You can also do that in cyber ranges.
Okay, so this is now taking it beyond what you can traditionally do with something like a penetration test, where you'd actually just use some software and try and also people in some cases and their specialisms to try and get through the firewall and into the organization in some way. We're now looking at simulating the whole environment and then continuing that attack beyond just breaching the security. But we're also then having the ability to evaluate it as well, which, coming from my simulation background, that's the biggest challenge. You can put a crew into an aircraft and get them to fly a mission in real life, but you can't, fail an engine, fail a hydraulic system or things like that, and also measure, objectively their response to that, because you don't have an operator's console that's connected to the aircraft in flight, but you can do that in a flight sim.
Right.
That's my perception of it. Is looking at it from a flight sim perspective. We put the crew in there. We create a scenario, and we see how they behave. Do they identify that there's an issue? How quickly do they identify it? Then, do they actually take the corrective actions after they've identified an issue? And what we're doing is effectively doing the same now with the cyber team.
Yeah, and so it's about how the failure modes and how well you fail, actually, because if if you're gonna die, people don't tend to operate well, right? And so in a flight sim, you can't do that in a real plane. It's similar to the way you can't run a pen test past what is appropriate for a production network. You can't do that. You don't want to bring the network down. And so in a cyber range, you can do things that you can't do in a real network, in a real organization. And you can see how a team reacts to things that their quote unquote worst day in cybersecurity. So you take it past the breach has already happened, and now it's here in your network. Now what do you do? How are you reacting to that? And so you'll find a lot of things kind of, the seams come apart, and people start reacting, and they don't go along their previously laid plans. And so you want to be able to find those things.
Yeah. So coming back to the founders of SimSpace, a lot of them were working within this real world environment, previously US Air Force and things, and could see that when they moved to Cyber Command, that there wasn't a real way to be able to test and evaluate, especially disparate people across the country in this cyber environment. So, pen testing and tabletop exercises weren't cutting the mustard. So it's finding a better way to do it. And that's where SimSpace came from. And it's become one of the de facto technologies for many military organizations to carry out training and evaluation of cybersecurity technicians and engineers.
Correct. Yeah. And one of the parts of that is SimSpace is able to connect things to the range that are difficult to connect. So when you talk about operational technology, and when you talk about power plants, water treatment facilities, things that governments and municipalities need to protect. Connecting those into a range and then making them an asset that you need to defend, or you need to make sure is working properly in amidst a cyber battle situation. That's where our roots are. So it's not just a matter.
And when we talk about OT, if you move away from military, you've got ATMs, in a banking environment. An ATM is an OT device, isn't it?
An air conditioner is an OT device. And what is keeping your server farm from roasting itself?
Or on a train infrastructure, switching equipment for signaling and switching of trains, in a power generation and distribution model. You've got all that power distribution and switching infrastructure as well for that. So it's protecting that operational environment, not just the IT environment that's core to it. Absolutely. So let's talk about how we'd actually set a range up, because there is a process to follow, isn't there? So first of all, you're going to look at designing a range and putting a range together. You're going to then look at configuring that range, and then moving into the actual activity around running that range. So the recce for the blue team, the red team, and then moving into the actual event itself. So do you want to take us through that process and maybe show us how that's done within a sim itself? So within a cyber range, so people can see what a cyber range looks like.
Yeah, let me move my screens around here, and share it out. And I'm just going to give you a view of my screen so that you can see what a range looks like. Okay. So this is the SimSpace portal, and I am all the way down the rabbit hole to the network map part of a range. So this is what a simple business medium range looks like in our portal. This is a template. So you asked about the ways you can build a range. You can build it from scratch, machine by machine, subnet by subnet, or you can use a wizard. We also have a tool that we're prototyping now, which will be able to read different tools, EDR tools, network security tools, and be able to ingest data from an actual environment and build a range out of that. So there's a couple of ways that you arrive at a range like this. But once
so
you have it,
design it from scratch, take a template, use a wizard, or effectively ingest data to be able to create it from a real environment.
Exactly. And then after that, you can, make clones. You can, we have a whole system of working with ranges where there's versioning controls and things like that, where you can leave notes as you make changes. But once you actually have a range stamped out, you interact with it through this live action event format, where you have objectives, you have key terrain, you have attack campaigns, and you had asked about the kind of the process of working with a range. We have all of these different phases where we can take a range through and actually have teams work with them in various phases. So there's the design phase, the setup phase, where you're, assuming you're changing the range in large ways, adding or removing machines and subnets. And then you have the recce phases, where you actually would have a blue team come into the range. And let me show the access control here. So you can have people enrolled in different capacities here. So if you have a blue teamer or a red teamer, they can only see different parts of the interface that are appropriate to them. So you wouldn't want to have a red team be able to see the lay of the land of the defender side until they have actually discovered that themselves in the game, if you will. So
because they were coming in from the outside world with no real knowledge of the internal, other than maybe a little bit of social engineering or something they may have done in advance to get a bit of an idea what's there. To make it realistic as possible is limit their access to what the range looks like.
Exactly. Like you would want to stage it so that the red team has whatever they knowledge they have, but they don't know everything. And so the access controls in the platform allow that to happen appropriately. So you have the different recce phases for the teams to come in. The blue team would make sure all of their tools work. The red team would make sure their attacks work, make sure that they haven't left any artifacts from previous attack attempts around the environment to raise red flags. The execution phase, where all of the things happen and the event happens. And then your assessment and post-event phases, where teams kind of come in and look at what happened during the event, and then everything is scored and those are delivered to the teams that participated.
So we'll just cover a couple of things. So that blue team side thing, part of the design process is to overlay the cybersecurity tools that they would commonly use. So if they're using a particular SIM tool, a particular EDR platform, they access a system in a particular way, they're going to have exactly what they would do, in their real environment. So it will be Splunk or Elastic, it will be SentinelOne or CloudStrike, whatever technologies they commonly will use, they'll have access to. And part of that recce for the blue team is to see that everything looks correct for them and they've got all the tools that they need to be able to deal with the defense of the environment.
Right. And so in this example range, I have a couple of tools in the site security subnet. There's some Mandiant Flare VMs for the hunters, Splunk, a security onion, a SEP server. But in an actual customer environment, they would have their tools that they're familiar with, ideally in a network that represents is representative of their network. So it may
Okay.
look completely different, but their tools should be the same tools that they're used to working with.
Okay. And then when we talked about scoring and evaluation, one of the key things about range is we can see everything that's happening, and which we'll move on to later when we kick off the activity. So we can actually see how the attack starts. We can also see how the defense detect and then work against that attack to defend the system. And we can actually see that both time and also against some MITRE attack framework, so we can see the stages of the attacks gone as well. So it gives us a really good understanding of what's happening at any point in time in real time.
Right. So yeah, once we have things set up, there's some pre-work that has to be done in terms of objectives, key cyber terrain, and setting up the attack campaigns. But once they start firing off during the event, you can watch them happen in the network impact map, as I'm showing here.
Yeah.
You can also see the kind of the quick hits on the MITRE attack framework, see the different TTPs that have been used in attacks in this view here. And everything, in one of these live fire events is kind of laid out up front in the objectives. So you would want to come up with some objectives to test your team on, and put that in beforehand, in your setup phase.
Yeah, so in this case, when we're looking at the access to key terrain, we're looking at creating tiers. So the tier one will be the key area where the majority of information lies, but they've got to get via other tiers of the infrastructure to get to it. So we can see that progression to it, and once they
Exactly.
reach that tier, the attack's been successful from the red team's perspective, but also the defense has failed from a blue team's perspective if that happens as well.
Yep, that's the idea. And so, as you can see here in my key cyber terrain map, I have the domain controller mapped as tier 1 infrastructure. There's other tiers, but the tier 1 is the one we're talking about in that objective, where it's prevent access to key cyber terrain.
Yeah.
So gives you a way of talking about the critical infrastructure in an environment. And most likely tier 1 infrastructure, there's going to be more than just the DC in an actual environment, but this is just for play. This is my demo environment. And then the attack campaigns. So I have a number of automated attacks set up here for this event. And you could actually have live red team attacks portrayed in here as well.
So that's them manually carrying out the attacks how they would if they were attacking some real infrastructure.
Right. And red team for an event, they would actually plan those attacks, and so they could list them out here as well with the automated attacks, and so they can be scored on. So during an event, the defenders would come in and they would use our built-in ticketing system here for the platform. They would talk about things that are happening. They can also use their own ticketing system that happens for events as well. That's a normal part of the process is to create tickets. This is an abnormal part of a normal customer's process. They don't use SimSpace's ticketing system for their normal process. So
they'd be using some kind of ITSM platform or some tool with a ticketing platform. So something like ServiceNow or that kind of environment.
Yep, and plug it into their SOAR tools. So that sort of integration is coming for our platform, but right now it's Defender logs. That's the way to go for scoring things in our platform.
Yeah, so the
So
evaluators will be looking for particular logs appearing, things like we've detected, a particular threat, because of we've seen this,
right.
or we've detected a threat, we're not sure what it is, but then later on we believe it's this particular, advanced persistent threat or this particular, vulnerability that's been utilized.
Yeah, and according to the objectives, maybe they just need to detect the
Yeah,
activity, and that's the blue action, whatever it is you define up front. It is enough for them to just simply talk about it and see that it happened.
yeah,
Um, you could also have objectives for an environment where the attacks have already been run, and the defenders are just looking for, it's like a game of Clue, um,
yeah.
uh, during the actual event itself. Those are fun as well. You don't always have to have a live attacker or
So
threats
Captain
happening in real
Mustard
time.
with the lead pipe in the library.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and your
Okay.
objectives could be appropriate to uncovering those different things that have happened in the environment already.
Okay.
So there's all sorts of fun to be had.
But that really comes back to this objective analysis. So we've got things that we can measure.
Mhm.
Objectives that have been set, specific tiers within the infrastructure, particular activity to be detected. So we've set those objectives so we can be objective about the scoring then. So when we evaluate, we've got real things to evaluate against, rather than it being quite subjective with just maybe a copy of some infrastructure in a cloud environment that's been attacked. It's going to be quite difficult for you to understand what's happening. With this, we've got those objectives, we've got the logs, from the attacker and also from the defender's perspective, and we can see exactly what's happening.
Exactly. And when our professional services team runs events for customers, they will actually have people on the red side and on the blue side simply there as a fly on the wall, trying to listen into all of the chats, trying to basically embed with the team to keep a manual and be a sort of a scribe.
Yeah.
So there's that level of logging that happens as well during professional services run events.
Yeah, because like any engineers, what goes into log is normally quite small amounts into an electronic log, but there is lots of discussion, lots of thought process, and sometimes it's like doing a mathematics test. It's more important that you know how the workings out happen than really what the answer is. It's how did you get there is the most important thing. So having that interaction and capture of information, that discussion is quite important as well.
Exactly, exactly, and that's part of why, I mean, what you see here in this live action event view is the tip of the iceberg as far as what is going on in the SimSpace portal to make this range happen.
Yeah.
What I'm not showing you right now is the whole network design aspect of this. Um, what we could do if, for instance, one of the attacks, the live red team messed up and they took out the entire domain. Oh, well, nobody can log into their workstations anymore. We could then, behind the scenes, spin up a clone of the entire range and switch it out in the network design here. We can just switch out the currently plugged in deployed network, and no one has to log out of the portal. All of the participants are still enrolled in the event, and boom, it's all back.
Yeah.
It's a way to eliminate downtime, because that's another important aspect of this is for an organization to take their teams offline and play in something that isn't doing their job. It's a lot of resources, and
Yeah,
so
and it
you need to
and it
make sure
needs to
that
be majority of productive time as well, not
exactly.
waiting for paint to dry for
And that's a
machines
huge
to go
issue
back to previous
when you're
state.
dealing with labs of VMs. I mean, how many times have you waited for, oh man, the domain, oh, now we need to the domain trust relationship is bad because we rolled a new DC and we didn't do anything with the workstation. So now no one can talk, and you've got hours gone down the tubes just dealing with these silly mundane things. And so
Yeah.
that's a big part of the whole apparatus of SimSpace is keeping that downtime to a minimum.
Yeah, and some of the stats on users utilizing cyber ranges are things like a 58% increase in their effectiveness in dealing with a threat. Because they're practicing. It's like anything: the more you practice, the better you get. I did a post the other day on LinkedIn talking about Formula One teams. Formula
Mhm.
One teams don't change wheels in a pit stop in 2.1 or 1 point. I think it was 1.9 seconds that was done earlier this year. They don't do that because they've just analyzed it. They only do it because they analyze it, take away all the steps that are not required, tune the process, but also then practice, and that's what the idea with this is to actually create an environment that is safe. It's an environment that we can spend 100% productive time working on threat analysis, threat hunting, doing the analysis once we've identified a threat, and dealing with the situation to hone our capabilities, our skills, our experience to the highest level. So when it happens for real, we can deal with it quickly, effectively, but also with confidence. And I think the confidence comes in two spaces. It's the SOC team themselves, if they've been through lots of different scenarios and working as a team, they know how to operate together, how to communicate effectively and deal with these kind of things. But also then if you go up the tiers through the management into the board, understanding that their security is top notch and has been tested fully, and we've seen the results of the evaluation, we know it's going to work, it gives everybody a lot more confidence as well.
Yeah, and it's I mean the concept of perfect security is really just a concept. You always have to practice. You always have to, a lock is only a lock as long as it's watched.
Yes,
Otherwise, it's just a social contract, right?
that's
And
right.
it can be broken. And so, how do you train for the fight of your life? I mean,
Yeah,
that's what we're talking about in cybersecurity is when when do you know, or how would you figure out if you're currently under attack by a nation state actor, or the super hacker is what I name the fictitious threat actor that someone's looking at their logs and they're just sure an attacker's in there. Well, how do you say they're wrong?
yeah.
What if they're right? And so, how do you train for that scenario? It's something that you always have to train for. You always have to assume you're wrong, assume the attacker's in there, and what would you do if it were the case?
Yeah, and no one can be protected 100% just with technology. It's always people, and people are where we tend to have issues. It's where things go wrong if people make the wrong decisions, follow the wrong processes. So being able to evaluate not only the technology but the people and process is really important in cyber security to make sure everything works together in harmony.
Exactly, exactly. Sorry, I'm stopping my screen because I'm just kind of wandering around on there.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. So we've only got a couple of minutes left because we want to try and keep this down to 30 minutes. So because we're going to move on next week and we're going to talk about live fire events and how a live fire event goes through the process followed and what the resulting piece is, whether that's a no cost evaluation, so we can actually do those currently a no cost evaluation for people just to see where they are and how the technology would help them, but also a fully costed out LFE where they get all of that knowledge, all that capture from all the conversations in the room and everybody that's doing, and then a full report at the end of it, from the professional services team. So we're going to cover off, both of those type of activities next week, same time, 2 o'clock, to go through that. So anything else you think we need to cover today, just to finalize, that overview, what a cyber range is. Like I said at the beginning, not many people know what a cyber range is. It's quite a new terminology. So anything else you think we need to throw in there just to finalize things today?
One thing I didn't really touch on is user emulation.
Oh, yes.
It's a simple to understand um, concept. You have agents running on each of the workstations wherever you want it, and those agents are doing user things. And so that's another part of defending an environment, is knowing what activity is normal and what activity needs to be investigated. And when you have a environment that's completely quiet and there's no actual users working there, or maybe you have traffic generation spitting out traffic on the network, that's a different place than an actual living environment where users are clicking on things, sending each other's emails. So that's another aspect of
Yeah.
our cyber ranges, is we can run that user emulation.
Yeah, I think that's really important. But you say if it was completely silent, you're going to hear a pin drop, aren't you? You're going to be able
Exactly.
to pick out that first part of the attack quite easily, because there's nothing else to get in the way. But normal network activity masks a lot of things that are happening in the background, so it makes it much more challenging to identify some of this activity. So it's important that you've got that user emulation in place to be able to simulate what users generate on the network, and also the time of day as well, because that user activity changes throughout the day, doesn't it? We have lunch breaks, we do slightly different things at different points in time, so it's important to create a real simulation of that environment as well.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a bit like going back to my flight simulation piece I was talking about before. It's like send them out on a mission where there's no weather, there's no clouds, there's no wind, there's no rain, there's no fog. It's just perfect visibility all the time, because you never get that in flight. There's always
Yeah.
something that's going to get in the way, that's going to cause issues and make things more difficult for you.
Right.
Controlling the aircraft and everything else. So it's important we have that. So a little bit of an analogy, weather compared to end user activity.
Yeah.
So, and anything else we need to cover? Because I think we're coming up to
I think
nearly
that
25
that's
to there.
good.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks ever so much for all your efforts today, Jesse. It's
Thank
been
you, Lee.
great, especially as it's an early time for you, because you're on the West Coast, aren't you?
It's a little
So
bit
it's
early. Yeah.
it's a 6 a.m. start, was it? So it's
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
6:30 now. It's
Yeah.
not so bad for me. It's 2:30 in the afternoon or just gone. So
Oh, we have
not as
good
bad.
coffee out here as well. So
Oh, good. Yeah, you need
cheers.
the coffee. But like I said, join us next week, same time, 2:00, and we'll actually extend this on. So we've talked about an overview of a cyber range. We'll give you an idea of what a cyber range looks like, the kind of things you can do with it. And next week, we're going to move into LFEs, so live fire events, and what a live fire event looks like for real, and what you get out of it. What as an organization you can gain from carrying out a live fire event. Following week, we're looking at training, and we'll talk more about that next week, but looking at how training can be done using a cyber range to make it more effective training for the individual. But also you can use it for evaluating new starters as well, which is quite important, that we know what the capability is of any of our new starters before we put them into the live SOC team. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today, and hopefully see you next Wednesday at 2 p.m. GMT, where we're actually going through live fire events. Thank you very much.